exiting practice mode and going live. Anything you say will be recorded from this point forward.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the February 1 Utilities Advisory Commission, and welcome to our new council liaison, Councilmember Lowing.
Thank you.
We'll start with roll call, starting with our members joining us online. Vice Chair Johnston.
Present.
Commissioner Scharf.
Present.
And Commissioner Metz.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie.
Present.
And we're expecting Commissioner Forcell shortly, and I'm present as well. We do not have any agenda review or revisions from last meeting or this meeting, so we'll move on to oral communications. Are there any communications from the public for matters not on the agenda?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to make an oral communication, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. I see no hands raised.
Thank you. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? I see no revisions or changes to the minutes. Does anybody want to move to accept the minutes as provided in the packet?
I'll move it. Second.
Great. We'll vote on the minutes. Vice Chair Johnston,
Yes.
Commissioner Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
and I also approve the minutes as provided in the packet. So we'll move on to unfinished business, and we do not have any unfinished business. So we can move on to Director Batchelor's report.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. Evening, Commissioners. Start off a little bit and talking a little bit about our energy prices around our high bills for our gas rates. As all of you are aware, we alerted you back in December that we were having extremely high gas prices. The gas market fluctuates greater months due to factors such as national weather, gas production, storage levels, as well as the national and international trade and demand. Other utilities in the region are experiencing the same impacts as we are. Since these high prices in late November and early December, CPUC has been attempting to inform customers in advance to take action in saving these energies and trying to avoid surprisingly high utility bills in January and February. The city is offering resources to help with these high bills through payment arrangements, energy efficiency tips, warning centers that have been open. We'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. Those who also some financial assistance and some payment reliefs. And if the community is interested in any of that, should contact our customer service at 650-329-2161. I do have some great news though with this. Today, we received our February gas commodity price, and it has dropped down to about $1.26 in January. But in the January bills, the customers will still see a higher billing because of the overlap of how the bills are put out. And so January, we'll start seeing those prices in February, probably mid-February, we'll start seeing those prices drop down. But it was $4 a therm, and now today we found out that prices have been dropped down to $1.26, so that's really good news. Also, 2022 Sunshine Program, our solar battery storage discount program administered by the Building Council and Climate ended December 31st of 22. Palo Alto ranked first in the number of Sunshine program. We had 151 registers. A number of solar and storage contracts were signed, 32 contracts. Of those 32, 23 contracts were for solar only, 8 were for solar and storage, and 1 was storage only. Although SunShares is not administered by the CPUA, the maximum participation and customer CPA programs such as home energy efficiency and heat pump water heater programs are going to be taking its place. So there'll be more about that. EV Financial Incentive Clinic. We had our first workshop in January 25th. It was a virtual multilingual EV finance of clinic held in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. The workshop is geared towards lower income customers who may feel they cannot afford an EV. And there were over 190 registers, a total of 85 attendees during these workshops. We broke them out into 3 different breakout rooms where we had multilingual folks talking to these residents, talking about fuel, talked about car maintenance, talked about what those lower costs would look like. We also talked about greenhouse gas emissions, and then rebates and incentives, different levels of EV chargers, new and used models. And we're planning on hosting many, many more of those type of workshops throughout this coming year. Again, those workshops can be found on our website, cityofpaloalto.org/workshops. And there'll be registrations and more details for each of those. There's a ribbon cutting for Stanford Healthcare for EV chargers. Stanford Healthcare recently installed 15 new electric EV charger stations at the Hoover Pavilion Garage. Stanford participated with the city's electric vehicle technical assistance program, which helped organize the technical evaluations, design, permitting, contracting selection, and equipment installation. Stanford's also permitting phase for installing EV chargers to 2 other their garages, and has invited the city representatives to be part of this ribbon celebration on February the 9th. Water supply update. With the recent storms we've had, measurable positive impact to the regional water storage, which is now expected to be much better than what we've seen in the past. We're hoping with the recent snowpacks that we'll start seeing these reservoirs being on track. The Water Supplier San Francisco Public Utilities Commission will provide more updates later this month regarding water supply conditions and the rate projections. The final numbers will be released in April of this year. A little bit about hydro. Where are we with our hydro? Huge amounts of participation that California received in December and early January have put the 2023 water year on track to be one of the best years in the recent memory. As of January 30, total in Northern California is about 40% above average for the time of this year, and Central Valley is about 70%. And the recent cold weather has meant that most of the participation has been formed into snow, and the snowpack levels are about 70% and 110 average in the northern and central hills, respectively, through enough to end the drought for the past few years. Reservoir levels will stay at least back up to roughly average levels of this time of the year. And then any upcoming events in detail, again, like I said, any of our workshops that anybody might be interested in is cityofpaloalto.org/workshops. I also wanted to present a little bit of a slide presentation to talk a little bit about some of these recent storms that we had, what we did about some of our communications, as well as talk a little bit about outages, and then also some of the flooding that took place during that period of time. Sorry, I can't see. Next slide, please. So as we looked at this, I took into account basically from December 31st, New Year's Eve evening. That's when the surge started through January 15th. So basically a 15-day window period of time. And a little bit about the storms itself. Next slide. The The San Francisco Creek, greatest concerns due to the nature of the creek flow. As you can see some of these photos here, we saw triple rainfall causing a peak water flow of about 6,300 cubic feet per second. That's more than 10 times the participation of 600 cubic feet peak that we would typically see. You can see where how high that actually went up. There was some actually flooding. It did crest the bank a little bit on the 31st. We got pretty close during some of the other days, but it never did crest over the top. And then you can see in that top right-hand corner, there was actually a car that was up underneath that bridge that got into the creek bed. We coordinated with multi-agencies, National Weather Services, the Valley Water, Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, Santa Clara, and San Mateo County, and the joint authorities as we were monitoring at Pope Chaucer and then at the bridge locations. Next slide, please. As you can see, we had equipment out there taking out debris. They cleared about 150 tons of fallen trees, debris, and mud from the roadsides. And they also, we asked for mutual aid of getting about 100,000 sandbags. Some were pre-made, some were that were residents actually had to go out and fill their own sandbags during that period of time. There were 50 trees related to emergency calls, 19 of which included trees down into our power lines. I'll talk a little bit more about the power issue here in just a minute. So we did decide that it was important to get residents off the streets. As you remember, it was very cold during those period of time. Libraries served as daytime warming centers during the regular business hours, and the community centers Monday when libraries were closed. The community center, big thanks to the CSD group as well as the library department to open up these resources overnight on January the 4th and the 5th. We had 15 visitors and 7 folks decided to stay overnight during that period of time. The centers were open January 9th, basically through the day, and also recently beginning on the 21st due to the cold weather. Red Cross brought in cots and blankets were provided to anybody that would like to stay during those periods of time. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there was a multi-department response from the city. In these, we felt that it was important to open up the libraries and the community center for folks that needed to, might have been out of power during those periods of time, so they could charge up their devices. They could listen to the weather reports that were coming through. And we had door-to-door folks facing, and then we were also handing out flyers in the areas where the heavy flooding was located at. We went to the website, we went to blogs next door, we did Uplift newsletter, and the city manager next slide. So during these January through 15th, we had 23 power outages. We impacted at about 10,500 customers during that period of time. The first round of storms to many outages began in the evening of January the 4th. And then we had the second storm in January the 7th, the weekend. The average time that customers were out were about 5 hours. We were able to get customers up sooner. And then there's one incident here I'll talk about where it was about a 14, 15 hour period of time. And you can just see some of the down photos of some of these trees that were in the lines. We recently had moved our field service reps that are our first responders for gas leaks, fire hydrant hits from cars. They respond to pretty much any kind of type of emergency. We decided to move them over into the electric operations side so they could be more eyes out there. As you know, we are restricted with some of our positions. We just don't have enough bodies. Huge thanks to our contractors who helped us out, working hand in hand with our crews during this period of time. Otherwise, we would have been in a world of hurt if we didn't have our contractors with us. it would have taken us days to, it was never going to be a 5-hour window on the average period of time. So they helped us out tremendously during that period of time. The one particular was in January the 8th. We had 21 customers out on Walnut. A tree was knocked out by, we had a little bit of lightning, and a lightning strike took that tree, as you can see on the downside on the far left-hand corner there. We had 17 customers or 21 customers out. We were able to restore by 6 p.m. 9 with 11 customers that were out most of the time, which was right in the area of where that tree had come down. The lines were wrapped through the tree. We needed to wait for our tree trimming crews to come back out and be able to trim those trees up off the ground so that we could get our pole back up in place. When the lightning hit the tree, it actually snapped the pole and it topped the top half of the pole down. So then the unfortunate also too is that's in a backyard easement area. So the poles are in the backyards. So it's not like the front side where we can get to most of our equipment. So we actually had to get in the backyards and do some work and replace that one pole. It also stressed the other pole that we were able to re-guy and take some time, but it mostly was due to the large tree taking out the power lines and trying to get it out of the backyard clear enough that we could actually start doing some work. We checked in, we actually did personal touches with those customers. We actually knocked on doors. We left flyers during that period of time. We offered up some of the warming centers, those folks that were out for those lengthy periods of time. So that was the one exception to all the outages that we had. We were able to, as you can see, the next one on January 10th, there was 4,500 customers out. We were able to restore 97% of those customers within 2 hours. And then by 10 a.m., we were able to get the rest of the customers up. As you know, our system is pretty robust. We're able to switch around, being able to pick up most of the customers. We had another one that it started off at 3,200 customers, and we were able to get that down to about 100 within about an hour and a half. And then we were able to restore about 75 more customers out of that 100 within 4 hours. And then we finished it up within that period of time with another hour and a half to get those customers up. It was a large tree that was down on Bayshore that was leaning into the primary. And it relayed all the way back to the substation and took out one of the circuits there. So there was quite a lot of damage from just down trees. We did not have any equipment failures during these outages. It was all basically due to weather and the heavy winds that we saw during those periods of time. Some of the things that we did on our communications, we've changed our protocols. We've talked about our protocols in some time as we've been going through this. We activated the EOC, which is the City Response Emergency Center. It was open from the 4th through the 15th. And then at the same time, we decided that we would open up our DOC, which is our department operations. So we had folks 24/7 out at the UAC, which is at the municipality center. We had operators in there. We actually had folks answering phone calls from customers. We did not roll any of the calls into the comm, which were our calls usually typically go after hours. They go to police dispatch. We knew that the 411, 911 numbers would be really extremely open, and we didn't want to put too much more traffic on that. So we decided that we would leave our phone number up, make it live. And so when customers were calling, we were actually able to see what was really going on. I think that it had helped us with our outage communications, as well as we had some extra people on for our communications piece, making sure that our outage map was up. it was running smoothly, and that we were able to get information out to the neighborhoods pretty quickly. Again, using some of those field service reps, we actually did flyers to some of those folks in those areas. We knocked on doors in some of those areas where those larger outages were taking place at that period of time. These are just a few public comments that came back that we had seen, that they were very grateful for the time that they were out. Some, like I said, were out for no time. One customer was out for about 15 minutes during that period of time. And so I think that we stepped our communications up much better than what we have in the past. And we're able to communicate to the public at that period of time. The last slide, please. So one of the things that we've been talking about is that we're going to put a new OMS, an outage management system, in. It's been ordered. It should be ready to go by June-ish of this period of time this year. And one of the things that we are excited about is that this will be more interactive than what we do today. Right now, all we can do is just basically take calls in, but we can't take any calls out. So everything is done by person at this period of time, where this outage management system will actually be able to, customers will be able to log in. They'll be able to have phone calls come back to them. And we'll have a time frame where folks can opt into this piece of software that once we get it in place. And so for any kind of planned outages, right now we hang flyers on customers' homes when there's a planned outage. And so we'll be able to use this OMS and actually text, email, phone call, if folks have a phone number at home they would rather use. However the customer would like it. If they want all three, we'll be able to program this into this new OMS. So it'll have a lot more capabilities. It'll be able to track based on the protocol for right now. Typically in the past, what's happened is there's an outage that comes in and it goes through PDCom. They will call the operator. The operator will actually come in. At that period of time, then they would end up calling Catherine or somebody from the communications team. And then by that time, we would be able to send out, first initial notification about an outage. So that just takes way too much time. We've realized that. And so what we do now is that it's the responsibility for when the operator actually gets the call to actually put it up on social media that there's an actually active outage that's going on right now today. So that way their customers can actually look at the outage map. The outage map comes up automatically because it's tied to the OMS that we have in place today. But there was a lag time of actually how that information you'd have to actually search it to see what's really going on. So we changed some of the protocols a little bit differently. And then the operator will stay on it with communications out to the public until somebody from the communications team is able to respond at that period of time. It's much easier during the daytime. Everybody's here. It's not that big of a deal. But like right now, not that many folks are around. So we do have operators on until 9 o'clock at night. But after 9 o'clock, then they go off shift and they are on call for any kind of calls to come in. So this outage management system will be much quicker on our response time back to customers at that point. So again, we see a lot of advantages and moving pretty much in the 21st century, I think. So it's not really a stone and a rock any longer. So with that, that ends my report. Can I answer any questions?
Do any commissioners have any questions or comments? Vice Chair Johnston.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Batcher for the report, and I really appreciate the detail you've given us about the outages, and it really sounds like you were able to step up and solve those problems. So I really appreciate that. One question about it, I did read that the city's now entered into new labor contracts with the unions, and I wonder if you anticipate that will help with our recruiting problems, particularly on the electric side.
I think that anything that we were able to get out of the negotiations would be helpful. There were some pretty significant amounts of increases onto the line section portion of it. I'm hoping that it'll be enough that to keep the folks that we have, especially some of the younger apprentices that we have in place. We did have one individual that was with us, went through his apprentice program, got to his 5th year, and he was about 5.5 years into the trade with us and decided to go to PG&E. But he is one. We did have another apprentice during the same period of time as stayed. I think the thing is that I'm not perfectly clear or have a good feeling that we're going to attract new linemen with the wage increase. I think that we still are going to have to do some work on that area. But like I said, every little bit helps during that period of time. Talking to the linemen, they seem to be quite happy with the increases that they got. And they were thankful for the amounts that they received in this negotiations.
Thank you.
Commissioner Metz.
Yes. Well, Director Batchelor, first of all, I'd like to echo Commissioner Johnston. I biked over to Chaucer Bridge one day when things quieted down. It was unbelievable what they were pulling out of that creek. I mean, there's an immense pile of trees. But one thing I wondered about that was not mentioned was there's flooding on West Bay Shore. And is that impacted, our substations, Colorado Ave, and I guess there's one at Adobe Creek also. Were those impacted, or is there any thinking about something we should be doing differently about those substations going forward?
So we were pretty fortunate. The freeway did not flood. The lower section on the west side of the Bay Shore there was more of the flooding area. That Colorado is fairly a little bit higher than where the MSC sits today. And one of the things that we are looking at that, if you remember, it's probably was in, I'd have to look it back, but September timeframe, the UAC approved a package for the substations to be from security lights, fencing, things like that. One of the things that was in that was building some solid walls, dropping some solid walls at Colorado. Right now, it's just a wood fence that is tethered side by side all the way around. And one of the things that we're going to be doing this year is we're actually going to be replacing all that wood fencing that surrounds that area and actually putting up a solid wall, pre-made walls in that area. Should stop some of the flow that would go back into that area. But, we didn't see any kind of flooding or any kind of water problems in those two substations during this period of time.
Okay, right. So we're expecting that's not an issue going forward?
Not at this time. I think that we saw quite a lot of water that came down during that period of time. And I think that, we were able to, be able to work through that. We did station some large sump pumps over in that area just in case and we knew ahead of time. So we did put out some pumps, spreading them out across the yard edges There is a little small creek that's on the kind of on the south side of that. And so we had pretty much ready to go that we had hoses that we would have pumped into that creek bed if we had to.
Commissioner Billy?
Yeah, I want to echo fellow commissioners. Just a minute.
I do want to echo the fellow commissioners in commending the response and the outages, but in particular, just wanted to express thanks and gratitude for the crews that were physically out in it and facing that. You know, I think a lot of times when we're responding to crises, people don't necessarily think of the utility crews that are out there waiting in the muck, facing these, power lines down and things. So just wanted to express that gratitude. I was really thinking about the crews during that out there. And, while we were hunkering down and staying dry and warm, just the crews that were out there doing that work and keeping the rest of us safe. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One of the things that was also very pleasing, we asked our crews as well as our contractors that what we ended up doing was we ended up asking them to change their shifts. And we didn't, there's a section portion of it in the contract that says, I believe it's 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, you have to give notice to someone to change their shifts. We went in and talked to them, explained to them what the situation was, and there was no hesitation from the crew standpoints or even our contractor to say, you know what, if you want to split us. So we split our crews in half. We had half of them in the morning time that we worked from about 6 in the morning until about 8 o'clock at night. And then we had another second shift of contractors as well as our other crew that would come in and they would work until about 7 o'clock in the morning. So there was some overlap, but we were covering that 24-hour window and they were more than grateful. We also offered them to stay if they wanted to stay, because you can imagine that our linemen do not live here in town. So we offered up hotel rooms if they wanted to stay. They didn't take us up for it, but it was an offer that we made for them. And they were more than glad to work whatever hours that they needed to work. So it was grateful when I talked to them to thank them all for being flexible during that period of time. So thank you.
Commissioner Forcell?
Yeah, I also really appreciate the extraordinary efforts of lots of people. My question is about trees. You mentioned there were something on the order of 50 trees that fell. Are they city-owned trees? Were they privately owned trees? I'm just thinking, was there, thinking ahead to the next big storm, is there something the city could do to get out in front of some of these falling trees in terms of maintenance?
Surprisingly, the majority of those trees are privately owned. Some of them were in backyards. That's where we took most of our large hits from, was trees in the backyard. We are working with 2 residents right now where there's, it's hard to say. There's 3 redwood trees that are probably about 80 feet tall, I'd say, at this period of time. But one of the things that we noticed, and it's in the backyard, and those poles are about 40 feet, and so the trees are about twice as tall. We're going to have to remove those trees because they're actually intertwined into the wires. The good thing about it is that it is a 4 kV system where these trees are located at. If they were 12,000 volt, we would have burnt that wire down really quickly because of the 12,000 volts. So we're working with homeowners. One of the things that we did do a debriefing afterwards, what worked, what didn't work. We need to get more aggressive with our tree trimming program. We actually need to go around and look at front trees, our trees, city trees, as well as some of these trees in the backyards. And we need to actually be a little bit more proactive about looking at ways of how we can trim these trees. And like I said, unfortunately, in these redwoods, we probably will have to remove some 2 of the 3 out of the 3, which I'm sure that's going to be a little difficult. But I think so. It was more of a combination, but the majority of them were privately owned trees. There was a huge eucalyptus tree over on Bay Shore that went actually into the 60. It was probably, it's next to a building and where the line is located at was probably a good 20 feet away. And it just toppled over and got into our 60,000 volt. And it took forever to actually treat. We actually had to shut down more customers than what that outage actually occurred so that the tree trimmers could get up there. And it took them a good 6 hours to actually trim that tree to actually bring it down safely. So we also we need to look at some of these distance and some of these tall trees and really look at that 60,000. So we have a 115,000 volt line, 3 of them. And if you remember back in 10, I think it was 10 when the airplane crashed, when it really pretty much put the city to dark for those 12 hours. That feed comes in at 115 and then we take it out at 60,000 and that 60,000 runs to all the other the substations, which is 8 of them. So that's kind of our main line. Some of it's aerial, some of it's underground. So the whole entire run of it is not 100% aerial. But we need to do a little bit better job on our tree trimming. We also realized too, is that we couldn't have enough tree trimmers. Our tree trimmers are actually coming out of Public Works. So big thanks to the Public Works team, the fire and police that helped us those nights. And we realized that, we could have used probably about at least another 50 to 60 tree trimmers that would have, been able to lessen some of the timeline from what these outages really were from. So, we are having conversations now with Public Works. We do pay, the utilities pays for the contractors, but it's managed out of the Public Works Department. So those are some of the bigger things that we saw that we probably need to be a little bit more proactive with.
Any other commissioners have any comments or questions? I had a few. I guess I'll just echo the praise of the really great work that a team worked together to keep us safe and electrified, not electrocuted. I had a couple questions. You had said something earlier about the water this year, and did you say it was enough to end the drought? It wasn't enough to end the drought? I didn't hear what you said about.
Yeah, so what I was talking a little about was that the water supply right now, the storms, always help, of course, but the city's water supply, the reservoirs are still low. They're above average for this time of the year in years past, but they're still well down. And we will see from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission will probably give us some updates and release some numbers in April about how their reservoirs are doing, what their levels are. And we should get some final numbers there during that period of time. So once we get those, hopefully it'll be in time for the commission meeting. If not, I will share those again in May.
Great, thanks. And then my other question was about the community centers that were open during power outages and just during the storms generally, and what lessons were learned and whether that might be something we can use going forward for other types of, storm or other emergencies.
One of the things that I think one of the areas that we talked about was that we need to probably think about when we get into these storm-related periods of time that we're not just running around. The library department and CSD did a fantastic job of standing these up in a short period of time. But we did talk about that. We probably need to be a little bit more proactive, that when we know that when there's storms going to come up, so that we're not moving people or asking people to stay. Both the directors from library and CSD stayed after hours. They kept the libraries and the community centers open during those early mornings and late at night periods of time, where we probably could have, maybe asked their staff, or maybe they did ask their staff. I don't know this for a fact, but trying to help out during that period of time so that we've been proactive and at least got that information out to the public a lot sooner, that, hey, if the storms are going to come really bad, here's where you could go to these libraries and do that. So those are some of the things that we learned that we are going to implement in our procedures, that we will keep these areas open. Mitchell Park was open for periods of time as well too. But we just didn't have enough staffing to keep all of them open. So I think that that's one of the things that we are going to work on with libraries and community center as well. But yes, they could be used for, other, if we get a really bad cold front again, we could open those back.
Great. Thank you very much for that report.
Thank you.
We will move on to new business. Item 1 is I'll read the.
So this is a third phase agreement with Northern Power, NCPA, Northern California Power Agency, to look at geoenergy. And I believe that Carla Daly, that's going to be Micah. Okay. So Micah's going to speak to this. So Micah is one of our resource planners. So is Micah here, or is he going to be online? He's online. Okay. All right, Micah, you want to take it over?
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, as Dean said, my name is Mike Babbitt. I'm a resource planner in the Resource Management Division, and I'm going to be talking with you about an opportunity we have to enter into a 12-year power purchase agreement for some geothermal energy through the Northern California Power Agency with a couple of other members. So I'm going to talk about our existing electric supply portfolio and how it's currently structured or balanced across a couple of different dimensions. I'll provide a little bit of discussion around our load projections through 2045. I'll talk very briefly on some of the dynamics we're seeing in the California energy market and how it's shaping how we're thinking about this opportunity. And then I'll run through kind of the specifics of this deal and why we're bringing it to you to recommend to the council ultimately. And then I'll kind of briefly touch on some of the analysis and findings that we're seeing through our integrated resource planning effort that's been going on for the last 6 months or so. So first, looking at our electric supply portfolio, I'm going to show 3 different looks of our energy load resource balance on a monthly basis, an hourly basis, and on an annual basis. So what you're first looking at on this chart or on this slide are 2 charts of our average monthly position during the on-peak hours and during the off-peak hours. So the chart on the left is the on-peak. Specifically in this chart, you can see the black line is showing what our average load is in a given month. So it's a little over 40,000 megawatt hours per month, a little bit higher in the summer months. And then the bars are the energy generation that's coming from our various supplies. So starting at the bottom in the orange is our solar resources. Next up is the blue coming from Western, and then the lighter shade of blue comes from Calaveras. The brown comes from landfill gas power purchase agreements that we have. The small green sliver is from one wind PPA that we have, and then the white shaded gray bars is what is the contribution that we would see from the geothermal project if in fact we contract for it and it comes into our portfolio.
Micah, Can I interrupt with a quick technical question?
Sure.
Can you remind us on peak and off peak? Is that defined as a fixed range of hours every day?
Yeah.
Does it vary?
Yeah, that's right. It's on peak is I want to say 7 a.m. to
6 a.m. to 10 p.m.
6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I think.
Monday through Saturday.
And then off peak is everything else. So evening hours and weekends falls into those off peak hours. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. So the kind of the major takeaway and then short in the winter months. And then with a little more granularity, we're shorter in the off-peak periods as well. And I'll go through that in a little more detail on the hourly charts. Another requirement that we have as being a load serving entity utility is we have to run a resource adequacy program where we demonstrate that we have local resource adequacy, system resource adequacy, and flex. I'm just showing the local and system components. Our local requirements are set on an annual basis, and we have to procure resource adequacy to meet the requirements. So our requirements have jumped around a little bit in recent history, but on average, they've been in the 80 to 90 megawatt range. Our local or our resources in our portfolio contribute about 30 megawatts of that 85 or 90. And the geothermal project would qualify as local, so it would help us meet this requirement. The system side of the equation, we're generally long on system RA. We're able to claim system RA from all of our hydro, primarily Western. And so we are generally selling system RA into the market to other entities that are short. So this, if a resource qualifies as local, it also qualifies as system. This would further increase our long position on system RA, and it would basically allow us to sell system RA.
Sorry, can I interrupt again with a question about?
Please.
So what does it mean to comply with the local resource adequacy requirement? Is that like it's located within a certain geography that's close to Palo Alto, or what does that mean?
Yeah, there's a number of different regions within the Cal ISO market, and if the resource is located in one of those specific areas, then it qualifies as local. So the geothermal project is located, I want to say, in the Northern Bay Area region of the California Independent System. And as a result of that, it qualifies as local. Some of our solar resources that are in Southern California, they do not qualify as local RA, but they qualify as systems. So on this chart, you can see that the orange bars are a little bit bigger than the ones on the left. Moving on to the hourly load resource balances. I'm going to show two different charts, one of our winter position and one of our summer, because our position really changes depending on the season. So this is kind of similar to the monthly graph, but instead of the duration being months, it's now hours. So we're getting a little more granular. The blue line shows our load. And our load, our baseline load starting at 1 a.m. is around 80 to 90 megawatts. And it peaks, around 100 or 110 around 5 p.m. in the afternoon or early evening. Our resources are all of these gray bars added up. And what you can see from these charts is that we have deficits in all of the evening hours, and then we're just barely meeting our load during the daytime hours. So during Q4 and Q1, there's significantly less solar power that's being generated, and that shows up in our portfolio. If we move into the summer, you can see that we're very long during the day. So we're generally selling energy in all of these hours, or we have more than we need. And then we're still a little bit short in the evening hours. And so kind of the major takeaway here is that we're generally short year round in the evening hours because of the amount of solar we have in our portfolio. Power, so it reduces that deficit that we have, and thus would reduce our exposure to the market in those hours.
If I just could clarify for a second, I mean, what you're really saying is geothermal is a base resource. We can use it at any time. I assume everyone is long in solar. I mean, I assume most people are out with lots of solar. There are at least times that I remember when there was negative price for putting energy into the market, where it actually cost us money to do so. So this is a really good thing to have a base resource rather than to have all this solar that continually really comes when we don't need it at the moment.
Yep. So this is looking at kind of those same two things, but now we're zooming out to an annual basis, and the graph starts in 2025. So we're projecting what our portfolio is going to look like in 2025. The top black bar is our mid load projection, and I'll go into a little more detail in a minute on what that is. But I think the main concern or hesitancy on the electric supply management side is not wanting to over procure energy. So if you look in 2025, we're projected to be long. Our load is at, call it 850 gigawatt hours, and our resources are almost at 1 million megawatt hours. So that means that we have more energy than we need. But based on that, baked into that assumption is an average hydro production year. So the hydro between Western and Calaveras totals around 470 gigawatt hours. The last couple of years, we've seen significantly less generation than that. So estimating whether or not we're going to be long or short on an annual energy basis is a little bit challenging, especially when you factor in load uncertainty and whether or not we'll see the load growth that I think a lot of people are hoping for. Just a couple other points on this chart. You'll notice that the green bars is the one remaining wind PPA we have that's set to expire in 2028. We have a series of landfill gas PPAs that start expiring as early as 2028 and ultimately go into the 2030s. And then we have the ability to renew our Western contract starting in 2025. So this presentation is kind of, based on everything that we know today, but there's uncertainty around what our portfolio will look like as soon as 2025. So these are 3 different load projections that we've looked at. We're using the middle one for this analysis. Lauren, I see you have your hand up. If you want to jump in, feel free. If not, I can keep going.
Thank you, Micah. The only thing that I want to do is I want to go back to, you had done an average hourly load resource. I think it was 2 slides back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if we overlay the 87,000 megawatts on this chart, are we going to see a flattening of our gray? Are we this bell curve, that, if you will, are we going to see a flattening of that?
Yeah.
Or is it still going to be a bell curve? It's just going to be lifted.
You can actually see the contribution of the geothermal above the gray bar.
That is the gray slant. Okay.
Yeah. And so the assumption in the analysis is just that it's going to be we're going to sign up for ultimately 10 megawatts, and we're going to get 10 megawatts from it every hour of the day, every day of the week, et cetera. And you can see that if you go to 1 a.m. in Q2, our supply resources generate 50, and with geothermal, they'll generate 60. And our demand, or base demand, will be 80. So we'll still be a little bit short.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I wanted. Thank you.
so into these different load projections, I think the low projection kind of matches up with the historical trend the closest. If you look at our load, going back 20 years to getting to today, we were closer to 1,000 gigawatt hours. And then I think last year our load was around 830 gigawatt hours. But there's a lot of good reason to expect that we might see load growth from a combination of data centers, EV charging, building electrification, and you can come up with an estimate of how much that's going to be, and that's one thing, and then you can come up with an estimate of when it's going to happen. And so the primary difference, I think, between the mid and the high is that the mid case assumes that the load growth happens a lot slower over a longer period of time, versus the high projection assumes a lot of load growth as soon as 2025. So I think the mid projection is somewhere between, I would say it's on the optimistic side of conservative, but we go back and forth internally on what we should use. So this is based on the mid. Through the integrated resource planning effort that we've been working on internally and with NCPA, they've hired a consultant by the name of Ascend Analytics, and they share a quarterly update on what they see in various energy markets across the US. And we borrowed a couple of slides from their presentation that we wanted to share tonight. So this and the next 3 slides are all from their market update. And there's a ton of information on this chart, and a lot of it's really interesting. But the major takeaway is that the trajectory of the market is retiring base load power and replacing it with intermittent renewables. And the net impact of that is that power prices during the off-peak hours are going up, and power prices during the day when the solar is blasting are going down. So we see kind of the market dynamics moving in a way that makes a resource like this geothermal more valuable. And that's the exact takeaway of this slide as well.
I'd like to ask a question about this one. I found this chart really hard to believe. Could you either summarize now or send us by email the analysis behind this chart, especially the projected gigantic penetration of wind and solar? As Commissioner, I think Sharif pointed out, we're already curtailing those at times. And, to imagine that those are just growing the way this shows, and it also says that storage basically doesn't happen. It's just hard for me to imagine how that combination of things is the future, or how the grid works if that's the combination of resources that we have. So it says storage deployments are outpaced by addition of intermittent resources. So, I mean, that seems like we have a mismatch today, which this makes much worse. And so I just don't see how that works at all.
I think it's a great question. I'd love to defend their slide for you, but I guess my main point with sharing this is just that, whether you agree or disagree with their trajectory, the way that the market is going is very much that it's placing a premium on all of these hours of the day when wind and solar aren't generating. So,
I believe that. I don't want to dwell on it tonight, but I would.
So in addition to their on-peak and off-peak power prices, they also have a price forecast for resource adequacy, which is the product that I mentioned in our earlier slide. So we have to buy local, we have to meet certain requirements for local and system RA. And if we're short, we buy, and if we're long, we sell. And on this chart, they're showing RA prices on an annual basis. And you can see back in kind of the 2017, 2018 timeframe, these products were being transacted below $50 per kilowatt per year. Then recently, in the last couple of years, they've jumped up into the $80 to $90 range. Jim and I did some transactions last fall over $100. So this product is becoming more and more expensive, kind of further driving the value of this geothermal. And Ascend Analytics trajectory is that we're going to reach a top in the 2025, then they expect prices to come down, and then they see them kind of rising over the long run. So all of that really is just to kind of give you the perspective of how we're thinking through the economics of this specific opportunity. So about this project specifically, it's a power purchase agreement between Calpine and NCPA for 100 megawatts of geothermal. The project starts at 50 megawatts in 2025 and increases to 100 megawatts in 2027. Palo Alto's share would be 5 in 2025 and then 10 in 2027, which translates to 43,000 megawatt hours and 87,000 megawatt hours. It's a 12-year contract term starting in January 25, ending December 36. The PPA price is set at $79 a megawatt hour, which is an annual cost to Palo Alto of just under $7 million. And the analysis is of evaluating this is basically saying, okay, what are all the benefits that this resource is going to generate for us in revenue? And are those revenues going to be greater than the cost of $79? So there's a couple different components that go into the benefits or the revenue that this resource would generate. There is the energy price, there is the renewable energy credit, there's the local RA value. And for each of those, there's a decent amount of uncertainty around what those prices will be. So this resource is an around the clock or a baseload resource, and forward market prices for this type of product. We have forwards that go from 2025 through 2031. These prices have been ranging between $62 and $85 a megawatt hour. There's been a ton of volatility. We saw energy prices the last couple months well over $100 a megawatt hour. Bucket one rec prices, we recently transacted over $20 a megawatt hour. Local RA value, we sold RA over $11 a megawatt hour. And so a lot of these ranges, depending over the last couple months, they look pretty conservative. And if you go back 3 or 4 years, they look crazy expensive. So we're just trying to get a sense of kind of what's realistic. But we see a lot of potential benefit in this. And it's tough to say what kind of the upside is likely to be, but in the kind of the low end side of our estimates, it's still a net value. So those are the main ways that we're thinking through the economics. Commissioner Scharf, did you have a question?
I guess I was trying to understand if we bought some other base resource, right? Because obviously what I took out of this was that if we bought more solar, we don't need more solar because it doesn't provide the energy at the times we need it. When you look at those charts, we're above it. So, I mean, I suppose wind, right, is not a base resource, but it's blows in the afternoons. I was just curious as to what other options you have for base resources and what prices those are at. And I guess the other option is you just buy in the spot market, right? I mean, that's the other option. So how does that compare doing those options to this in terms of economics?
Yeah, so as far as base resource options that we could buy within kind of our limitations of how we manage our portfolio, we have the renewable portfolio standard requirements. Then we have a carbon neutral requirement. So the primary baseload resource in California is natural gas, and hydro around the edges, or depending on the type of hydro, it might be running as a base resource. Outside of that, I don't think wind and solar are typically thought of as base resources, just because of their intermittency. There's nuclear, there's coal. Those aren't really things that we can easily go procure in the market. Outside of that, we can go into the market and buy a strip of around the clock or baseload energy. But we're going to pay the prices that you see on the screen right now of, if we go buy a 5-year contract today for baseload, and we want the renewable energy credits and we want the local RA, we could be paying as much as $116 a megawatt hour.
So if we don't buy this, then I assume when we have those energy shortfalls, under the graph where we don't have any, we buy on the spot market, correct? Which is basically natural gas for the most part.
Yeah.
And then what happens is we buy some carbon offsets or something along those lines to green up our portfolio. So this seems a lot better, obviously, because it's a true renewable. But I am curious as to, it's hard to do it because it's the spot market. But what do we average tend to pay during that period during the spot market? Is there an average, or we could compare what you think would happen if we didn't buy this and how much money we'd spend versus what we'd spend for this? I guess that's my question.
I think the way that we've attempted to analyze that question is by looking at forward price curves of what brokers are telling us that they would charge us to go buy a strip of energy over, an entire year. So if I go and say I want to buy 10 megawatts for calendar year 25 today, I didn't look at the forward price today, but it's probably $65 a megawatt hour for 2025. And so if you take 65 there and you take, call it 14 for the renewable energy credit that we're going to buy, we're at 79 right there. Does that answer the question?
No, it does. Oh, that was very helpful because so from a cost perspective, this is completely competitive then, right? That's really what you're telling me. It's completely competitive. It's a base resource and we need the energy during those periods. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely.
I would add that we haven't really seen very many other proposals for renewable whenever we've done RFPs for renewables, pretty much all we've gotten is solar. We hear about some geothermal projects being developed, and we've heard from consultants that compared to those projects, this proposal here is very competitive cost-wise. We haven't seen very many wind proposals. There's potential for getting some out-of-state wind, which could be have a sort of a generation profile that will be complementary to our load, so it would produce a little bit more in the evening hours. So we're looking into that, and we'll dig into that a little bit more during the IRP process too.
I really have one more question then, and maybe it's just driven by the fact that other NCPA members want it, but why are we not buying more?
We asked for more, and we're in the process of seeing if that's feasible. But I think that Santa Clara kind of led the way on this.
I was gonna say Santa Clara is probably buying it all.
Yeah, Santa Clara they'll take it all if other members don't, so.
Fair.
Commissioner, I don't know who is next, Johnston or Smith? Smith.
I'll go ahead. I'm really happy that you raised that question, Commissioner Sharp, because I was asking myself the exact same question. Why aren't we buying more? And if it was something that, like the deal that we did with the Water Resources Board and our fellow contract holders, we ended up giving away that which we didn't want. And if there is more that's available, I think we should probably make ourselves available to do that. That's my comment. My question, though, is on the net value and how you calculated the net value. The way I think about this is you have geothermal that's coming in, it's constant every single period of the day, every single month. It's always constant, it's always 10 megawatts. Great. There's a peak period during the summer months where we are in a position where we are selling our excess, as we've discussed in the past, where we're selling our RECs. Does that add to the net value? Is that how you are calculating net value at the $37 range? And the $5 range of net value means that essentially we either have a very, very dry year or dry hydro year, and we don't have the ability to sell that. Is that how I can rationalize net value from 5 to 37?
I think the way that I'm thinking about it is, if we were to go buy this product on the market, what would it cost? And what it could cost would really be the net value difference. It could cost $5 more than $79 a megawatt hour. It could cost $37 more than the PPA price of 79.
So you're looking more at the cost fluctuation on the spot market than you are on our ability to take advantage of our extra during the summer months, which is what we typically do. Or does that selling during spring and summer that we've done historically, does that even enter into this calculation?
So these values are looking at an average over the entire year of what we would expect the resource to generate in revenue.
Okay.
And it's versus what we would be paying for the cost of it.
Okay, so the three bullets above it, the bucket ones, the local RA and the total benefits, maybe the total benefits is a combination of the two above, but those are additional contributions to net value.
Yeah, so the net value is the total benefits minus the total cost, which is 79. And so the value, those are the three things that we get from it that are valuable to us. And during the summer, we're going to be selling the geothermal. We don't need it. We're already long. During the winter and during the off-peak hours, it's always going to be decreasing our exposure to the market. And then, it's going to be decreasing the exposure we have of local RA that we have to go buy. And it's going to make us even further long in renewable energy credits. And so right now we're selling renewable energy credits bucket ones and buying bucket threes. So it kind of further enhances that position as well. But this analysis is really around like, okay, if we were to go buy this same product out in the market, what do we see its comparative value today?
Yeah, the calculation doesn't depend on what we do with our portfolio, how we manage it, whether we sell or buy, whether we use it ourselves. It just looks at the total market value of all the products being produced by this resource compared to how much the project costs.
Commissioner Johnston?
Yeah, thank you very much. And most of my questions have been answered in the discussions that you've had with Commissioners Scharf and Smith, but I had a couple of questions. One is, it looks like we're phasing out of landfill gas. Is landfill gas also a base load, renewable resource?
It is a base load resource, and it does also qualify as renewable for us. And I guess I wouldn't say that we've made a decision whether we're phasing out or not. It's just our contracts are set to expire because they were 20-year contracts signed back in the early 2000s. So we may have the opportunity to renew those. One of the projects, they're actually looking to increase the size of it. It's uncertain what will happen with those resources. And kind of historically, they've always been some of the more expensive resources in our portfolio. Now they're looking fairly competitive with the market.
I guess that was my next question, how the price for landfill gas would compare to this $79 per megawatt hour.
Yeah, it's I don't know that we have a recent data point on that. I got to tour our Ox Mountain facility, or the Ox Mountain facility in Half Moon Bay a couple months ago, and just anecdotally, they shared with me that it's tough for them to turn a profit even at the higher PPA prices that we've signed. So I don't get the impression that they're just over there doing great. I think they need to see higher prices to run a competitive business as well. So the other question I had, I just, the concept of resource adequacy is not something I remember talking a lot about it. And is that a state requirement? it is. It's
and can they? It sounds like it can be traded, kind of the way RECs are traded.
Yeah. So it's every load serving entity is required to have a resource adequacy program. All of the CPUC regulated entities have a resource adequacy program that is set by the CPUC. Munis like ourselves, we create and set our own resource adequacy program, but ultimately, we're buying and selling to balance our requirements, and certain resources qualify for certain attributes.
So with all of that, I'm very comfortable with the idea of adding kind of sustainable base load resources. So thanks for the presentation.
If I can interrupt the commissioners, are you finished with your presentation? Or are you still moving forward? Because I'd like to give Mr. Babich.
Two slides. I'll go through them real quick. So
before we do that, if I could just comment briefly on the landfill gas issue, because people probably don't remember, but there was a big discussion at council maybe 7+ years ago when we did all these landfill gas ones. There was a whole bunch of concerns. I think it was from NDR, National Resource Defense Council, and a little bit from the Sierra Club. There's a bunch of issues where people would actually pour water into the landfill gas to create more of the methane. And that's sort of what I remembered. I just remember that at that time, council decided that there were some environmental concerns and we weren't going to try and do more landfill gas at that point. Now, things may have changed. I just wanted to bring that up in case people forgot about it, because I think I'm the only one basically who remembers doing that back then. Thanks.
So last two slides, I think you can see from the kind of the load resource balance slides that the GEO would be a good fit for all of the hours that we're in a deficit. And having a new baseload resource in the portfolio would hopefully go well if we see data center load growth, which is also a base load type demand profile. And then as the forward market prices continue to inch up or just go crazy, the $79 looks like a slam dunk. So as far as where we are, the City of Santa Clara already got their council approval. NCPA has signed the contract with Calpine, and so right now Santa Clara is the 100% off taker. And once the individual members get their council approvals, Santa Clara will assign a share of the project to those individual members. Speaking with you guys all tonight, and the finance committee in March, and then the council in April. And the contract would start in January 2025. And that's the end of my presentation. So.
Thank you. Before we go to commissioner comments and questions, I just want to check if there were any public comments.
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public wishes to speak on item number 1, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. I have one hand raised on Zoom. Sherry Listgarden, you may speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I guess sorry, I'm not very good at these things, but I just wanted to comment. I guess geothermal's my understanding, Jim knows all of this, but my understanding is geothermal's pretty expensive. I get that other things are more expensive, but something that's more complementary, I think would be cheaper, so something that matches our curve more as opposed to getting us yet more midday stuff that we don't need. I understand also the other thing that worries me a bit is the rec exchange. I think that was something temporary that we were doing. And if we're sort of baking those costs into our analysis going forward, that worries me a little bit. I don't think that rec exchange is very kosher for the long term. I was wondering about storage. One thing would help us a lot would be to save that excess midday stuff and plug it into the early morning hours, excess whatever. I don't know and it should last that long. So it should be fine. So I don't know if you guys have looked at storage and what the costs of that are. And then, I also wanted to raise landfill gas. One thing that I don't know is or maybe that's a dream. I don't know, but it'd be interesting to know what is a 20-year forecast for landfill gas? How do you sign a contract for that? I don't know. But so those were my comments. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak on item number 1? Oops, no other hands raised.
Thank you. Any commissioner comments? Commissioner Forceau.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Babbitt. The previous commissioner questions and comments have touched on almost every area that I jotted down as I was reading the report, but in many cases I just have a follow-up. So no particular order. I guess one of the things I'm curious, if the value is so obviously high, why is Calpine selling it for $79 a megawatt hour? Just with the old adage, there's no such thing as a free lunch, or if it looks too good to be true, pick your favorite cliche.
Yeah, I haven't been able to ask Calpine that question, but
is there some regulatory thing that sort of prohibits them from?
Yeah. Also, I think a couple things to keep in mind. This is a really large project, and these things take a really long time to negotiate and work out all the details of the agreement. And it started well before prices ran up like they did. And so, as the contract got closer and closer, we were just thinking, are they going to back out, or are they going to change the price on us? And it didn't happen. And, I don't know how they're thinking about the deal today, but it's not that long ago that market prices were half of what they are today. And so a resource like this did look very expensive, as Sherry just pointed out. But the market pricing and the dynamics of everything have changed pretty quickly. So I don't know that all of that can get ironed out in a contract that takes a long time to get everyone's buy-in on.
And the 12 years strikes me as on the short side for PPA. Is there a reason it's only 12 years instead of 20 or 25 or 30?
I don't know the answer to that. I can speculate around maybe they have some concern about the duration that they can guarantee reliable power production at that level. The geothermal is operated from a steam field, and it's
Someday it's going to run out.
Potentially. Yeah. So,
but it's not that the NCPA went and asked for 12 years. It's that's what Calpine had on offer.
I'm not aware of any reasoning, Jim, are you?
I think that's correct. I'm not aware. I think that the proposal they brought to NCPA rather than NCPA asking for that term.
And then another thing people brought up is Santa Clara, and I certainly made note that in the report it said that Palo Alto asked for 20 megawatts and has been awarded 10, and Santa Clara I noticed got 70 megawatts. And so I guess the question is why, or what would it take to increase Palo Alto's share if we're as excited about it as we seem to be?
I think the answer to that is when this proposal first came in, Santa Clara was the one that jumped on it right away, and they were ready to take all sort of a generous act on their part to slow down and let other members get into it rather than just take it themselves. So I think that's so it
wasn't the NCPA taking the lead. It was the city of Santa Clara on some level bringing it to the NCPA and saying they might share. Is that a fair description of the dynamic?
Well, I think the proposal came into NCPA and Santa Clara was the one who responded to it first and indicated their interest in taking the whole thing.
It's kind of an obnoxious question, but why didn't we move faster? Or is that?
I would say I moved pretty fast, but
fair enough. And then I just looking at the overall portfolio.
If I could just jump in on your question, as a former NCPA representative, I think it probably came down to some internal politics in NCPA with Santa Clara basically having the inside track on that. It doesn't necessarily mean that our staff did anything that was slow or anything like that. So I just like to defend staff on this and say, internal politics and that all at NCPA is probably the reason that occurred.
Thank you. Yeah, I really am not trying to point the finger. I'm just trying to understand. And then similar to some other lines of questioning, we talked about why the landfill gas is probably winding down. And the same question I guess I have about the wind contracts ending. Does the wind resource end? Are we likely to be able to renew wind contracts? Is there an old history of wind that we were iffy about it and we don't want to continue? I'm just curious why we project, or what's the future prospect for wind remaining part of the portfolio?
That project I expect will continue. It's only about 20 or so years old at this point, so it probably has a good useful life left in it. So I would imagine that the developer, the supplier, will probably come to us with an offer at some point in the next few years to extend that contract. But I really can't kind of speculate about what their marketing approach will be on that resource. So, we don't feel comfortable about assuming that we will maintain that in the portfolio. I think it's possible, but we'll have to see how they handle that marketing opportunity and how competitive the price is at that time when it's brought to us.
Are they in control of when they bring it, or does Palo Alto make the first phone call and solicit?
Usually they approach us, but yeah, if we don't hear from them, we'll certainly reach out.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, those are my questions. Thank you for your patience. And I will say I was very excited when I saw geothermal on the agenda, and it's keeping the existing geothermal facilities operational and solvent is great. I'd also be excited if there were ever an opportunity for new development. Anyway, thanks again for a good presentation, Mr. Babbitt.
Commissioner Metz.
Yes. First of all, kudos for reeling this one in. As a couple of commissioners have said, we see this as very important. And other folks have touched on, the near term, how could we get more for this project and so on. I guess the area I want to inquire about, which I think is broader, not just for you, Mr. Babbitt, but for the utility is, since we probably will want to have more of these going forward. And, people I talk with in grid modeling are saying, especially with IRA, that solar prices and value is going to go down long-term future. And therefore the price of something like this, the value of something like this is going to go up. What are we doing, from a process improvement point of view to be able to capture be on the hunt for these and capture these going forward, maybe be a little earlier into the game in future?
Jim, do you want to take that?
Sure. I'd say we're talking to NCPA about kind of handling RFPs for us in the future. They do they have a pretty streamlined process, and they have an open solicitation. So any developers who are on this meeting tonight, feel free to go to the NCPA website and you can submit a proposal there. And we've been talking to them recently about sort of proactively reaching out to some of the developers, in our Rolodexes to request, updated proposals from them as they become available. So, yeah, it's definitely something that we're thinking about, and we're trying to reach out to the developer community more frequently.
Okay, great. I hope we'll hear more about that.
Commissioner Bowie.
Thanks. Sorry. I share and echo the excitement of my fellow commissioners about the geothermal project here and just what this kind of renewable baseload offers. Two questions, and I'm sort of getting near the bottom of the barrel, I think, of questions. We've talked this one through quite a bit, so I'll do my best to find novel ground. The slide that's the 24-hour load balance, the 24-hour balance, is that off-peak hour in particular taking into account the projected load growth through 2045? Is that looking at data centers coming online and EV charging off-peak and things of that sort?
It's currently not. So the 24-hour graphs are based on our actual hourly load in 2021 with our projected supply resources in 2025 with the contribution of the geothermal. So that's kind of like what actually happened on a load basis in our portfolio.
Okay, I think that's actually a positive in that it probably means that this has an even higher value as that off-peak curve goes up to account for data centers and EV charging growth. The second question here, I'm trying to get to that novel ground, is the facility itself. I don't really know much about operations to it. Is it a closed loop or an open loop system? Is it drawing, is it drawing from a river, or is it a closed system in how it's generating power from heat?
Jim, do you know?
It's not drawing from a river. It's drawing from a steam reservoir underground. But I believe it's considered an open loop system because the steam, once it's released, it's not recycled back into the reservoir.
Okay, that answers my question. I was just wondering if there was any kind of potential for like a drought vulnerability to the operation of the plant, but it sounds like if it's just using steam from a steam field, then this is not a relevant issue. So thanks.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? I'm going to also try to, maybe find a new barrel, which is this. There was a comment in the report about unique operational risks to running geothermal that you felt confident NCPA could avert them, but can you maybe touch on what they are?
I'm trying to jog my memory on the specifics that you're getting at and how it was framed in the report.
And maybe just to help you while you're jogging your memories, I'm just really interested in what risks we're taking on, and this is also in connection that there were lower risks because it was already a developed project.
To necessarily specifically call any specific operational risk out, but rather point out that it's, there's operational risks to any power generation asset. Something that's unique about this opportunity is that there's no development risk that we're taking on with this project because it's already built and operational. But that doesn't mean that there's not operational risk associated with it. And beyond that, I don't have any kind of unique insights around specific operational risks of this facility.
Okay, thanks. And then my only other comment would just be if we can maybe talk with our friends at NCPA about getting a bigger share, that would be great. And then I think with that, I can see whether, I guess it's just I can't actually tell. We do have an action item here, so if anyone wants to move to have the UAC recommend the city council approve and authorize the city manager or their designee to execute a third phase agreement with Northern California Power Agency for the purchase of up to 87,600 megawatt hours per year of geothermal energy from Calpine Corporation's Geysers Power Company over a term of up to 12 years for a total not to exceed the amount of 76.2 million.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we'll call online first. Vice Chair Johnston,
I vote yes.
Commissioner Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowie,
Yes.
Commissioner Metz,
Yes, get more.
Commissioner Forcell,
Yes.
and I also approve. Great. Thanks for that discussion. We'll take a quick 10-minute break. It's 7:39, so let's come back at 7:50 for our next item.
Very good. So our next item tonight, do you want me to go ahead and introduce it, Chair Siegel, or?
Yeah, let's first see if there are any public comments.
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public wishes to speak on item number 2, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So we'd like to share some information with you about our One Water plan that we embarked on last summer, I suppose, after council approved our contract with our consultant. I'd like to introduce Lisa Belier, Acting Senior Resource Planner and the project manager for this project. She has a presentation and some focused discussion questions for the UAC to consider tonight.
Good evening, commissioners and council member. My name is Lisa Belier, and I look forward to telling you about the progress that we've made so far in the One Water plan that we've been working on since last July. I'd like to, let's see, I think we're going to share some slides, and as we're getting those ready, I'm going to just tell you about the key items that we'd like to get your feedback on tonight. We have 2 areas of discussion that we'd really like to focus on, in addition to giving you an overview of the work that we've accomplished so far. The 2 areas are identified, if you can go to the next slide, please. Identified as a discussion item here. So we have a recommended strategic direction for the One Water plan that we'd like to talk with you about and hear your thoughts and feedback. And the second discussion item on the slide is the portfolio themes. So at a high level, what we're going to be doing is we've made a list of water supply and conservation options, and then we're going to be ranking and packaging those options into portfolios and taking the top ranked portfolio to the city council for approval. And this is a water supply portfolio for Palo Alto. And so as we look at those portfolios, we're going to have themes associated with them. And that's the item that we'd like to have your feedback on. Of course, we'd like your feedback on any of this as we continue to proceed with the project. But those are the 2 main areas that we'd like to ask for your input. And I'll also be telling you about those water supply and conservation options and our 3-part screening process, 3-step screening process for building those portfolios and evaluating them. So we can go to the next slide. The One Water plan is a key action in the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, and it is a 20-year water supply plan for the city of Palo Alto. The goal is to really be able to manage future uncertainties such as droughts and climate change, multi-year droughts and climate change. And we are using a robust and meaningful stakeholder engagement method. We have already had 2 stakeholder engagement rounds of stakeholder engagement with the community, with city departments, and 1 meeting so far with regional partners, and we are going to have more stakeholder engagement. The work is being completed by Carollo Engineers, who has a One Water practice and is a national thought leader in the area of One Water. They have done One Water plans for other cities across the nation, including Honolulu, Phoenix, and Los Angeles. And additionally, this work builds on the existing plans and work of many different departments, including Public Works and Utilities, that has already been done, including the Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan, which included a robust groundwater assessment, and the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan work that Public Works has done, and then the past integrated resource plans that the Utilities Department has done for water. The most recent one was done in 2017. What the One Water Plan does not directly address is it's not a plan for the current ongoing drought, and it's not a plan for short-term emergencies and the short-term impacts of those emergencies like earthquakes and wildfires. Those are addressed under separate plans. And I also wanted to add that, this is a very collaborative process that we're working together with the Utilities Department and the Public Works Department. We have Karen North, Assistant Director of Public Works, here with us tonight. And so we are, and as I mentioned already, we are having a very collaborative stakeholder engagement process and working together with Carollo. Let's go to the next slide. Yes.
May I interrupt with a hopefully quick, just context setting question? Is the idea of the plan to enter into contracts, supply contracts at the point of council approval later this year? Or is the point of the plan just to have a plan in case we need it at some point in the next 20 years?
The point is, so the portfolios that I was mentioning, one portfolio is going to be, let's continue with business as usual and purchase all of our water, all of our potable water from San Francisco. Let's compare that to alternatives. Let's build a list of all the possible water supply and conservation options that we could do, build portfolios that could compare to that, and then determine which one we want to implement.
Yeah, you should grab that other microphone too. Just if I can add to that, I think that it's possible that we could be asking for council approval of something at the same time that we're asking for approval of the plan. We don't know what the plan looks like yet, so we may have something we're asking for approval for. If it's something large, if there are projects in there that are recommended that are big capital projects, it's unlikely that those would be developed far enough that we would be able to ask for council approval at the same time that we're asking for approval of the plan. We would likely have to come back and have a more robust engineering design, for instance, before we would ask for council approvals for something like that. So it's possible there might be some solid recommendations there in addition to just please approve this plan. Did that answer your question?
Not entirely, but I'll sit tight and listen to the presentation. Thank you.
So this is an overview of the road that we have taken so far and where we're going. We began the project when, we actually brought the scope to you in July of 2021 and then issued an RFP and began our work in July of 2022. Then we did a lot of data gathering and held our first community meeting on community needs and priorities. And in our stakeholder engagement meeting so far, we have used a hybrid format and had live polling and engagement for attendees. And we gathered information. We asked some broad questions about risks and water supply interests of the participants and gathered information on the needs and priorities of the participants and used that information to help us develop the evaluation criteria that we're going to be using to evaluate the portfolios. Then we developed a list of supply and conservation options, and in your packet there is a list that the list of water supply options and conservation options that we have developed. It's about 25. And so you can see what that list is, and we're open to any input on if there's any other options that could be on the list that we did not include yet. Then we did an assessment of unknowns. We did some more data work and held a second stakeholder engagement meeting with the community in December. And at that meeting, we went over all the possible supply options, asked for feedback on any additional options that we had missed. And then we also described our 3-step screening process that I'm going to go through with you tonight, and did a live poll on importance of those different criteria from the participants in that meeting. And then we are planning to have another round of stakeholder engagement after we've developed our portfolios and develop a recommended supply strategy and bring to the council a trigger-based implementation strategy and a final One Water plan. So that is where we're going. And I'm actually going to ask to jump ahead to slide 7 at this point, because I want to tell you about the first discussion item that we wanted to ask for your feedback on. That said, I think what I'm going to suggest is that I run through all the slides first and then come back for the discussion, because there's a lot of sort of One Water plan words that I'm using. And I think by the time I run through the 13 or so slides, I think the words may come together for you more. So if that's okay with you, then I'll just proceed with going forward, but interrupt me if you have any questions. So for the discussion item, this is a recommendation from staff on our One Water strategic direction. Basically, in Palo Alto, we think we need to take a close look at our water demand. We do have high water demand in Palo Alto relative to some neighboring communities and relative to the average in the region. And we have not reduced our water demand as much as the surrounding areas over the last decade or so. It doesn't mean we haven't made progress. We have made quite a lot of progress, and we've implemented a lot of water conservation actions. But we think we need to take a close look at what else we can do, what additional water conservation actions that we can take to reduce our demand without compromising canopy health. And that's the first recommended part of our strategic direction. The second part is, once we reduce our demand, then we want to be looking for sustainable and resilient water supply options to meet that remaining demand. And so with that overview of our strategic direction, I wanted to present to you a couple of images that show how Palo Alto is doing on our water conservation overall relative to the region. So if I can ask to go back to this slide for 2012 and 13, the average water use in the Bosque region, which is, you can see it on the map here, is 71 gallons per capita per day. And what the dots are on the map is they're showing two different things. The size of the dot is showing how much water is being used by a particular city or community. And if you look at the Palo Alto dot, we're using about 11 MGD in fiscal year 2013. And the color of the dot puts each of the communities into a category of greater than 75 gallons per capita per day is the red, and then so on down the list. So in 2013, Palo Alto was using its residential gallons per capita per day was about 98 gallons per capita per day. So we're well into the red category. And then if you go to the next slide, we did improve. Our water usage went down to closer to 10 MGD in 2020, fiscal year 2021. And we're still in that red category along with 3 other cities. Now, as I said, we have reduced our water usage. There's a lot of things going on over this time period. This was a year affected by COVID, and we know that in Palo Alto, residential customers used more water during COVID. But even if you look at the years before COVID, we still hadn't come out of that over 75 gallons per capita per day category. Other things there's a lot of different factors going on, like growth in different communities. COVID affected different communities in different ways, and each community may have taken different actions and investments in recycled water and conservation. And part of it could be tree health. But we know that this is how things are moving in the region, and we're aware of it. We have implemented a lot of short-term actions already, including Water Smart, water portal for customers, reinvigorating our our large landscape portal water fluence, and we have a suite of rebate programs with Valley Water, and we've been doing a lot of workshops for people to, implement water conservation knowledge and participation. That said, as part of this plan, we see it as a key priority to look for additional actions that we're either not already implementing or not already planning to implement as part of the plan. So if we can skip ahead to the water supply and conservation option screening process. So this is that 3-part screening process that I was telling you about earlier. The first step is where we take that long list of water supply and conservation options that you have in your attachment and pre-screen them. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this in the next couple of slides. We're going to put those options into 3 buckets: ongoing or already planned, not feasible at this time, or moving forward. And then the second screening is going to be the project screening criteria. Those are 3 criteria that are listed at the bottom of the slide: the yield, life cycle cost, and whether the option increases supply reliability in drought years. And I don't have any more slides on this, so if you have questions or if you want to give feedback on those 3 criteria, that it's what's listed in the slide here. So at that point, we're going to have narrowed down our water supply and conservation options significantly and group the options into 4 portfolios. As I mentioned, one of them is the continue to purchase water from SFPUC, all of our water purchases from SFPUC, and the others would be portfolios that have different themes. Then we would evaluate those criteria, those portfolios, using the 3rd step of evaluation criteria in order to develop that one portfolio for the council. To consider, the evaluation criteria are the 6 listed at the bottom of this slide, and I'm going to go through those in much more detail and tell you a little bit about the feedback that we got from our stakeholder engagement on those 6 criteria. Next slide. So in our pre-screening, these are the buckets. The green bucket is ongoing or already planned. And an example of something that's already planned is advanced metering. So we are going to continue forward with implementing AMI irrespective of what the One Water Plan decides. So we considered that as already ongoing or planned. Then the next bucket is not feasible at this time. And I'm just going to give one example of each. But for the not feasible at this time, we put in that category something like the Valley Water treated water. This would be to build a new pipeline that takes treated water from Valley Water 4.5 additional miles into Palo Alto's system to deliver that treated water to Palo Alto. And that would be something that requires collaboration across many different agencies and something that's very expensive. And we deemed that to have excessive cost and complexity at this time. Next slide, please. The next bucket is the options that are moving forward through this pre-screening process. For example, permanent dewatering water. The Public Works Department did a technical memo on this topic, looking at the idea of permanent dewatering, which is basically pump stations at certain locations in the city. And it's a permanent item that's there, and it puts water, takes the water, pumps it out, and puts it into the storm drain. So this would redirect that water to the sewer, and it wouldn't be a standalone option, but it would provide more water to the sewer, which would enhance the amount of water available for reuse through the reuse options. And that is in contrast to a temporary dewatering, like a basement dewatering that is only dewatering during construction. And that water was found that it was infeasible to build large infrastructure to move water from temporary sites. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was our pre-screening, and then we do our screening, and then the third step is where I'm jumping to now on these 6 evaluation criteria. This is what we showed to our stakeholders during our stakeholder engagement meeting, and you can see the different criteria and a little bit of information about what we mean by each of the criteria. And I think I'm just going to go to the next slide so you can see what we asked the participants to do. Is we explained that all of these criteria are going to be used, but we're trying to weight the different criteria in terms of the importance of that criteria. So we're asking for feedback, and this was the result. And it's interesting. You can see how the spread of responses looks. The highest 2 were supply availability and supply resilience. And at the lower end of the spectrum was life cycle cost, actually, and ease of implementation. Now, again, clearly all of these are very important evaluation criteria, and what we're going to be doing is a sensitivity analysis to look at if the weighting was done differently, would we get to a different result in terms of evaluation of our portfolios? So this is what we got. And I just want to point your attention to the charts above each of the lines. You can see that for something like life cycle cost, there was a wide spread of responses there. And the other thing I wanted to add is that we are also trying to continue to do outreach to get additional responses on this, because we got responses from the people who are participating in our meeting, but we'd love to have more feedback from a broader group of people in the community and interested parties. So we did send it to our One Water distribution list, which has about 3,000 email addresses, and asked for people to fill it out and provide their feedback. And we're going to continue to do that.
Can the public also go online somewhere and find that survey?
We are working on putting it on our website. It's a little bit technically complicated, but we're still trying to get a copy of it on our website. But we do have a One Water web page that's just explaining what this project is and trying to dive into what all the terms mean and provide all the links. And our contact information is on there. So if they're interested, they can find out more and participate that way. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the portfolio themes that we're considering and that we'd welcome your feedback on. The baseline portfolios on the left, and then we have minimize cost, maximize local supplies, maximize drought resilience, sustainable water supplies. So you could maybe think if there's additional portfolio theme that we have not thought of, or maybe you don't really like one of these themes, we'd welcome any feedback on that. Next slide. This is the last slide to just tell you about our next steps. As I mentioned, we are planning to do another stakeholder engagement meeting once we have our initial results. We have quite a lot of work to do in terms of modeling and gathering information and coordinating. And then we are planning to take those initial results and hopefully some stakeholder input on those results back to the UAC. And we're hoping to schedule a joint meeting with the Stormwater Oversight Committee. And that's because there's a lot of stormwater. Stormwater is one of the resources that we're considering as part of the water supply options. And so we thought that that may be a helpful thing to have that joint discussion. Then we are planning to bring an information-only report to the City Council with those initial results. And the remaining part of our stakeholder outreach is going to be just online. So we would ask for feedback on a draft of the One Water plan and then present the final One Water plan to the UAC and then to the City Council, probably in the fall of this year. So we'd really welcome any feedback you have and questions.
Do we have any questions? Commissioner Bowie?
Yes, thanks for the presentation, for all the work that has gone into the One Water Plan so far. I had a couple questions. So in terms of the stakeholder outreach, can you go into, maybe I missed it during the presentation, how people were engaged? I heard that there was the email list of the One Water Plan distribution list. How else were people engaged to comment on things?
So we have had 3 different groups of stakeholders that the way that we've thought of it. One is our city departments. So we've collaborated with, I think, about 6 city departments and held 2 meetings to try to outreach to different departments and get feedback from staff. And then in terms of our community meetings, we reached out, we set up a website, like a freestanding website on this topic specifically. We outreached in our newsletters and through Uplift Local, through our sustainability newsletter, through our email distribution list. Trying to think of other places that we reached out. Through our business associations and that's what I can think of.
Okay.
That we did our research to try to invite people to participate.
Okay.
And then the third category is our regional partners. So we reached out directly to the regional partners, other cities, BOSCA, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and we've so far held 1 meeting with them.
Okay. It's excellent to hear the process for how it's going. My question, and sort of maybe just caution, I think in the second group, is how each one of those options seems to result in like a self-selecting group that are either, have a vested interest in preserving how they use their water, so that they would be representing only that interest. And then people who may not know how they're going to be affected in some way, they might not click through. They may not understand that they should be in the room. So if there is a more active way to get people in the room, I don't know if that's like a focus group or things like, I just want to make sure that voices that maybe are not as frequently represented in a lot of utility contexts, tenants, maybe even the unhoused community, and they're just, people should be reached through this, because it seems like these supplies are very important in how we look forward at this. So that's my piece of just how do you get participants that are not going to self-select to be part of the One Water Plan to come to the table. So then also on when you're talking about the dewatering project and then on the proposed themes, I don't know if this fits into a separate bucket, but climate change, climate adaptation, and sea level rise. We got a presentation a few months ago about, groundwater inundation at sea level rise and sort of how we stand to have like salt infiltration into groundwater supplies. So if that is something that we're going to be living with as a reality in the next 25 to 50 years, maybe our groundwater, we were looking at where it could potentially happen, I guess, just understanding how we're adapting to climate change, not just on groundwater, but on plant choices writ large. Some of this may not be just pure like business as usual. We may just be living in a new reality. So.
Vice Chair Johnston.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. And this is obviously a very important discussion. You mentioned, and it's slides 5 and 6 show that in Palo Alto, we're using more water per capita than most of our neighbors. Do we know why?
We we haven't fully analyzed it. We are aware of it. And all we can do I can do is sort of speculate on some reasons why. Those are growth, the proportion of single family that we have in Palo Alto compared to some of the surrounding communities. If you think about that chart and think about some of the areas, they have more multifamily compared to single family. Some communities may have already invested in AMI or recycled water pipelines that are more extensive. But this is an area that we are aware of and looking at and trying to figure out. And we've already implemented a lot of actions in order to try to reduce our demand. And we are continuing to look at the options. And really, this is just trying to emphasize why we think this is a high priority in this plan, is to focus on this area.
I was wondering whether some of it was related to the tree canopy and the protection that we obviously have given and want to continue to give to our tree canopy. But I'm sure some of these other cities are, equally concerned about their tree canopy. So I think it would be very helpful to know if we can figure it out, why we're using more water per capita than some of these other cities.
Commissioner Scharf.
Following up on Commissioner Johnson's point, I think using a per capita model doesn't really make sense. I mean, you'd expect someone in an apartment to use a lot less water than someone in a single family house. And the reason is not the water they're using for themselves, but for the landscaping. I assume most of this difference is landscaping, be it tree canopy, be it whatever landscaping people have. And so I think you probably need to look at proportions of single family homes versus proportions of, multifamily housing, because I would guess you need to sort of break that out between multifamily and I would say single family to figure out a true use of the water. I mean, if our multifamily is using significantly different amounts than other cities, you'd wonder why. If our single family is using significantly different, given lot sizes and, adjusting for that, you'd ask yourself that question. I mean, whenever I see these things, I always see that, Atherton and Hillsborough use huge amounts of water because they have much larger lots than we do. And I bet if we went through Woodside and Los Altos, you'd see the same thing. I bet if you take that stuff into consideration, then you can get a truer picture of what's really going on. And I think that would be really helpful. And, as for tree canopies, I think that might be an interesting thing to look at what other cities do in terms of water and how much tree canopy they have. Because I think Palo Alto has a much larger tree canopy than most cities. But
Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Metz.
Yes, in terms of proposed portfolio themes on page 13, I'd like to suggest high energy because just about, well, first of all, it's a 20 plus year plan. So that seems likely outcome, but also many of the supply options that you're screening, most notably desalination, use a lot of energy. And the feasibility of that's going to depend a lot on what energy costs and how available it is. So just a thought is one of the scenarios.
Commissioner Forcell.
I would add to that, maybe even just looking at the carbon footprint of the water, because it could be high energy, but if it was tied specifically to solar, maybe we'd be okay with the energy footprint if it was somehow not high carbon energy, but otherwise I really like that addition as a theme. And I just wanted to ask, are we done with the presentation? Because there are lots of pages left going through the supply options. Were you going to talk us through those?
I can. I wasn't planning to. It's just open for questions. So
got it.
That's an attachment that kind of lists out every supply and conservation category of option that we're considering.
I had one question, which is, you have the term equitable, and I wonder how that's being used. I can come up with a lot of different ideas of what's equitable when it comes to water. And do we have a definition we're using for that?
I think this is an area that we're continuing to work with Carollo on to help us define that. But so far, what we talked about in our stakeholder engagement so far is, that this is both affordability of water and also, access to blue spaces and green spaces of people in the community. And so, that's what we have so far, but we're still going on this work and working with Carollo on our definitions.
I mean, right now we have different tiers of water, not a lot of pricing for water. So I guess I don't understand the affordable. I mean, we all want more affordable water, but if how that's being considered, is it that beyond price for some of these, what that means in terms of affordability? And I guess it's sort of an offshoot to this idea of people who live in larger, lot sizes may have different water needs than people who are in multifamily housing. So I struggle with it too, but I think it's important to know what we're talking about when we're talking about equity here, because it's a popular word. I just don't know how it applies here. I could see it being equitable. You could say it's equitable. You do it per capita. You could say you do it per square foot. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. How many trees? I don't know.
Yeah, I think another example of equity would be, only a neighborhood with a high density of multifamily houses gets groundwater and everybody else is getting hetchy. That feels like an equity problem. So we want to avoid situations like that where certain groups of customers are being served differently.
That's fair. That's an important point. I guess that's why it would be helpful to have a definition or maybe multiple definitions. I don't know. Any other commissioner comments? And then I guess my other comment would be, it would be great to have something on a website somewhere so that someone who's not quite as tapped in still has an opportunity to provide feedback before we make, ideally before that March 2023 meeting.
To provide feedback specifically on the evaluation criteria, or?
I guess on all of it, but yeah, I mean, the earlier in the process you get that feedback, the better it can be incorporated into that output at the end, right? And I mean, I don't remember how many people participated in the community meeting where the ranking of the different values was provided, but I don't think it was a big percent of the community.
No, you're right. Yeah, we're going to continue our outreach and we'll put something on our website so that people can weigh in on that survey.
Commissioner Forso.
Thanks. Let's see. I think you're asking for feedback on just whether these are the right two priorities. Is that right? I just wanted to.
And you're talking about the strategic direction slide?
Yes, page 7.
Yeah, I think we're trying to just ask if we're thinking about this right, particularly the demand piece and the supply piece.
Yeah, no, and I just wanted to say for me, it's a strong yes that the highest priority is to reduce demand. I mean, it's the same as in energy. I don't know if there's a word like negawatt in the water biz. But it would be a shame to go to great lengths to procure new water supplies and then water a small plot of lawn somewhere. So I think we definitely have to approach demand to the extent that we are able. And then priority 2 flows from that obviously we need water. And the another way that we could to dive into the equity argument or discussion. I just lost my train of thought, honestly. See if I can jog it by glancing at it was building codes, which again are a pretty enticing way to reduce demand, but I guess and they feel free. But I guess having stricter and stricter code, it isn't necessarily, and might be at odds with our targets for affordable housing, for example. So I guess I'd be interested in, assigning a price to that and the city subsidizing or something. If we were to do, for example, a near zero net water type code for development, or that might be extreme and not at all what you're thinking, but to incorporate that piece in as well. If that made any sense at all, that comment. Thanks.
Yeah, great feedback. Thank you.
Vice Chair Johnston.
So I agree that I agree with the comments on slide 7. I think those are sensible strategic directions. On slide 13, on the portfolio themes, when you say maximize local supplies, what's meant by local there?
We're really, I think, mostly thinking about within Palo Alto and within Palo Alto's control. So it could be a reservoir somewhere in Palo Alto, or a storage facility for, different. We have a multi-source storage idea, or something that was really an area.
So the issue here would be prioritizing local supplies as opposed to, a more distant supply, even if the more distant supply was more drought resistant.
Not exactly sure how that would look, because it does depend on, we're still going to be using all of our evaluation criteria for all of the portfolios, but it would be like putting some extra weight on the supplies that are local and really focusing on that as a like trying to do the most that we can with local supplies.
Okay, so on this slide 13, you're not asking us to eliminate some of these options. These are just various themes that could be incorporated.
This is, you could eliminate them if you don't think that they're valuable. It's really an open question of, do you like these? Do you think some of them should be eliminated? Is there something missing that we haven't thought of that you think is important?
I guess personally, I would emphasize the maximizing drought resilience and sustainable water supplies, and to the extent that that can be done locally, that would be good, but I would prioritize the other two.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Oh, Commissioner Bowie.
Just following on Commissioner Forcell's comment about building codes and maybe one nexus with the UAC and the utilities. I don't know whether there is a barrier on gray water capture and reuse in terms of building codes. And at permitting and sort of effluence with the utility, that just might, this is just one thing that was sort of stirred up as Commissioner Forcell was talking about, opportunities to reduce demand. If that's one place, I don't know whether that's something that's already going on in any widespread fashion or whether there is a potential nexus with the utilities work there.
Yeah, gray water is one of the resources that we're considering, and we do have a program. It hasn't had a whole lot of uptake. I think around 3 projects a year, just very small. So we'll be looking at ways to get more out of gray water use.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that presentation. Look forward to more feedback on it.
I'd like to just add one thing here. Our residents are really concerned about water. I'm not stating the obvious, but if you prioritize what they're really worried about, one of the biggest things is, am I going to have water coming out of my pipes? I mean, sorry, out of my faucets. Not is my grass going to go brown, or even my trees are dying. In fact, anecdotally, folks are not watering their trees enough because they want to keep their water usage down. So I don't think you have any choice but to, in this maximize local supplies, I'm not sure about the wording, but you have to source, you have to investigate every source of new supply in case we need it. And the second thing that concerns the residents is that, we may grow by 25% in the next 8 years in terms of homes and apartments and so on. So it's not just the infrastructure, but is there going to be water to put through the pipes? Very, very high concern. I mean, and justifiably. So you're onto something that's a top 2 issue here. And the other one is also with respect to this commission about the grid, because how can we do all this electrification without a better grid? But so I think the growth component you want to put in there. And issue of dewatering, because there's an example where you're dewatering in order to put it down the storm drain. So if you dewater and you put it somewhere else, that's not wasting water. It's the water's already wasted. So you've recovered wasted water. So that's the kind of stuff that we'll all get high marks for if you can pull that off. So.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to say we are using our demand forecast to take into account forecasts of the growth. So we'll be thinking about that feedback. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We will move on to item 3. Are there any public comments?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Thank you. So Heather, are you doing a presentation? It's a little backwards. We're recommending it to accept a verbal presentation, but I assume you're going to give one.
Is Heather here?
Heather, are you there?
She's just logging in.
Can you hear us, Ms. Dollar? We can't hear you, but it looks like you're muted.
Hi, thank you. I am here. I wasn't able to start that for some reason. Can you hear me now? Okay.
All set.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Heather Dollar. I'm the acting compliance manager for the utilities department, and part of that responsibility is to oversee the legislative and regulatory affairs program. And every year I come before you to give just a very broad summary of legislation that happened in the prior year, prognosticate a little bit about what I think is going to happen this year, talk a bit about the budget, and also get your approval for our annual legislative guidelines. This is just a verbal presentation, so we won't be going through any slides, and it'll be an overview since there is a lot of information and it won't be technical. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go about, and if I can't answer any, I will write them down and I will get back to you through any channels. My presentation will follow the staff report, so I'll speak a bit about what happened legislatively last year first, and what is probably the largest number of bills passed in any state in 2022. The California legislature sent a little over 1,100 bills to the governor, and he signed 997 of those bills. As noted in the staff report, there were a variety of utilities-related legislation to monitor, ranging from clean energy targets to foil balloons to indoor water use. But luckily, bills that may have impacted other POUs did not affect us significantly, as noted in your staff report, I believe, on page 1 of the report. For example, one bill to mention that illustrates that point is SB, which stands for Senate Bill 379, which requires most cities to start utilizing Solar App Plus, a web-based solar streamlining system. Our city began considering Solar App Plus before the bill, the technology now, so that new law didn't impose anything new upon us. Also, many bills that would have been significant operationally were amended into more palatable versions. You have some examples, I believe, in your staff report, but I could note very quickly 2 bills, Assembly Bill 2700, which as written would have required the governing boards of publicly owned utilities to ensure that their electric systems were upgraded properly in anticipation of electric vehicle charging levels. But as the bill was amended through the legislative session, it was changed to require POUs to only consider data from the CEC regarding those charging levels. Another quick example, Assembly Bill 2070, was a bill that would have required utilities to contact fire protection districts 24 hours before undertaking what's called hot work. This is a type of work that's a broad category. It involves regular electric improvements that have never been associated with igniting any fires, which was the concern of the bill's author. And a fire protection district was not noted, wasn't defined, so we didn't know if it included a local fire department, and it would have created a system whereby one government entity, a fire protection district, would have unique control over another government entity, such as a city. So this was a problematic bill, and after advocacy by the publicly owned utilities collaboratives, that bill didn't move forward. So those are just 2 illustrations of bills that we tracked that may have had significant operational impacts on us, but ended up not having any because they were amended. I'll move on now unless anyone had any other specific questions about any bills or anything in 2022. Okay, just briefly with regard to government budgets and funding, particularly the state budget, as you may have been reading about in the media, we thought we would be in a much better position than we were. Instead of having a budget surplus, we have a budget deficit. And we've heard that Governor Newsom is going to prioritize money to address homelessness and education while cutting climate spending. In fact, as proposed, he's going to cut about less than $1 billion. So last year's budget included about $7.9 billion just for energy alone, and the proposed budget preserves $7 billion of that. We know a little bit about specific reductions that he's proposing, which include less money to finance transmission projects, water recycling projects, carbon removal projects, and for zero emission vehicle credits and programs. The budget does, however, propose to preserve some CEC programs, which is good news, and that includes flood risk reduction and implementing clean energy policy. Everything is simply proposed right now, and it's very general. A lot of things are going to perhaps change. The governor proposes his budget in January of each year. The legislature holds budget hearings. There's a lot of negotiations. Legislative committees add. The governor's administration will develop a revised budget in May, which may be based on a different amount of money. So we're going to know a little bit more, hopefully a lot more in May, about what the financial situation will be, about what the budget proposal will be, and then we'll have a final budget in mid-June. Any other questions about that? Okay. I can turn to 2023 really quick. This year, the legislature has until February 17th to introduce new bills. So they have a few more weeks to get their new bills into the hopper, so to speak, for this legislative session. The expected topic of legislation, I believe, is noted on page 3 of your report. And that includes topics such as grid reliability, due in part to last September's heat event. Wildfire mitigation may again be a topic. And transmission and how to achieve our clean energy goals. Regionalization will also be a legislative effort, as noted in the report. We hear that a particular assemblyman is most likely going to introduce a bill that is going to be based on a report that CAISO just put out. We don't know what that bill is going to look like. Some of you may recall that this is not a new effort. The legislature has introduced bills in prior sessions that would have us, meaning California, look into ways that we can join with other states in the Western region to combine our grid and to combine resources. This seems to be a continuation of that same theme. Thus far, there have been some bills that have been introduced already. So a few that we're tracking include testing for lead in schools, quickening the pace of water supply projects. This would require timely state permitting decisions and may have positive effects locally. We're also looking at bills that would change the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals, which are bills that were introduced last session and failed. They're back again. And there's also a bill that would have building performance standards for improvements in energy efficiency and GHG reduction in large buildings. Many of these are what are called spot bills. This is when the legislators don't have a lot of context around what they want to do yet, but they have to meet that February 17th deadline. So they will insert a very, very thin bill, which includes maybe a couple of sentences that is just a topic area. Then they'll go back and flesh it out. So we don't have a lot of information now. The legislative session is less than 1 month in. Everything that I mentioned is going to change. All the bills are going to be amended, but that's just a flavor of what we're tracking. And I would just note that, and as in all years, we collaborate very closely with our trade association, CMUA, with other POUs, and with our joint power agency, NCPA. I'll just touch a little bit on regulatorily. We expect that the Federal Environmental Protection Agency is going to update their lead and copper rule later in the year, which is going to have impacts on the State Water Board. They're going to look at perhaps revisions as well. We are also currently drafting our state wildfire mitigation plan for the Wildfire Advisory Board. This is one that is due every year. Through CMUA, we're also tracking a proceeding through the CPUC. As you know, we are not a CPUC jurisdictional entity, but sometimes what they do may have impacts on POUs. Currently, they have a proceeding regarding poll databases and developing these databases that would provide information about what is on a poll, the poll load to attachers. And the administrative law judge is asking if POUs should be involved as well. So through CMUA, we are commenting and we are observing that process. That's all I was going to say about legislation and regulations before I turned to your motion and action for the evening. Unless anyone had any questions, happy to answer.
Commissioner Bowie, excuse me.
Yes, thanks for the presentation so far. And a question, so talking about the budget reductions around certain energy and water programs that were going on in California, is there an upscale, are there federal funds that are coming in through IRA that are comparable to those reductions? Is this kind of a reallocation making use of federal funds?
No to the latter part. The IRA has funds coming in, but they are in buckets. So for example, what we're really focusing on are the funds coming in that would assist with rebates for fuel switching. The IRA doesn't specifically fund the same buckets, if you will, that the state does. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. Having said that, the state budgets in different categories related to climate and energy and not, and there are always movements, whatever the finance staff can do. So at this point, I can't tell you that the federal budget is going to backfill the state budget. It doesn't sound like that's going to be happening, though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I could turn to the action item for the evening, and that is to approve the 2023 guidelines. As many of you know, the city has their own set of legislative guidelines as well as an advocacy process manual. The utilities department, because it is the most heavily regulated department in the city through various regulatory bodies, has our own set of guidelines. The suggested guidelines for your approval and then for council approval this year are substantially similar to the former guidelines. In fact, there would be no functional change other than saving time and perhaps my own anxiety due to a little bit of clarity and by not presuming any actions. I put some specific examples of the changes in the staff report. I believe that's on page 4. These changes would assist us. So for example, if we have a bill that we might want to oppose, but the guidelines already presuppose a support position or vice versa, we would have to reconcile that. With the new guidelines, we wouldn't have to do that because there is no assumption of a position. For example, last year, Guideline 9 had us specifically supporting efforts to maintain or improve the security and reliability of our infrastructure. We've interpreted this to mean that we'd like to oppose efforts that would frustrate those abilities. However, the guidelines never specifically stated that, while they did state support. So for this year's version, rather than guiding staff to only oppose or support, we would state something very plainly. So again, for the same example in Guideline 9, we would state that we believe that safety and reliability are essential and want to ensure we have the resources available for those efforts. That's the proposed Guideline 3. This allows us flexibility to support or oppose, or to educate or engage, as opposed to taking any specific advocacy action. So I would again propose that these guidelines, if you approve, would remain evergreen. We would bring them back every year, just as we do this year. We would go back to council and get their approval. And I would just note, as I flagged in the staff report, that council did add the workforce item. So the one exception to what I just said about not presupposing any possession is that particular item. And that is because when council passed the guideline, they specifically included the word support. And so I am keeping that same word to retain the spirit of what council wanted.
Can you also remind the commission the purpose of the guidelines? As I recall, they were to eliminate a lot of back and forth between your team and council. But is there still some overview that council wants to hold on to? Or right, so these guidelines, the new proposed guidelines, are extremely broad. And so within them, I mean, you could take almost any action without having to come back to council. So maybe you can give some background in what the guidelines are supposed to do and not do.
Sure. The guidelines essentially act as, I'm going to use the word bumper. That's not the correct word. When you're on the freeway and you see the guardrails. So it keeps staff within on the right road and on the right path, so that, for example, if a legislative office calls us and says, what do you think about this particular issue, or what are your thoughts on a bill? And it's not anything that we have spoken with the UAC about or the county lines. And we would make sure that we have the parameters before us so that we know how to respond, as opposed to just speaking from what we assume or what we presuppose. So this, in a sense, is kind of like directionality and our marching orders, and gives us a strong sense of what's important to the community and the city as we move forward advocating on behalf of CPAU.
How do you decide when to go to city council, and what role do these guidelines play in that?
We go to council annually, just as we come before you every year. We try to time it so that we come to you either at the end of a legislative session or at the beginning of a new one. So for example, this is the beginning of the new one, and that allows us the guidelines for the rest of the year. We go to council immediately after the UAC approves. Usually it's a consent item. Council has the opportunity to review what's been approved and then approve them. I can tell you that in my 7 years here, council has never pulled them off of consent, and council has never had any challenges or any heartburn about our particular guidelines. And I think that's because we merged them very well with the CMO's, with the city manager's office, and with the city's guidelines.
Sorry, I don't think my question was very clear. I'm trying to understand, as I recall, these guidelines were designed to avoid a bunch of back and forth with city council. Are you saying that in any year, there are no communication back to city council on any legislative matters, and you just once a year do an update, maybe more extensive than you provide to us? Or I'm trying to understand, or I'll just say the new guidelines I find to be tremendously different from the old ones. I don't find them to be similar at all.
Okay.
And they give me pause because I think I understand that they give guidance and direction in terms of the values and desires of Palo Alto, but I don't think they give you bumpers. And so what I'm trying to understand is, are they supposed to give you bumpers, or are they, and then when you're hitting, to just continue with this metaphor, if you're hitting against one of those bumpers, it's time to go to city council, or is it you just provide a briefing at the end of each year?
Sure. And part of what you're speaking about would be reflected in the advocacy process manual that I mentioned. And that is kind of the procedure whereby if there is something outside of these guidelines, then there is a process that we follow. We go to council specifically and say, how would you like us to respond to this legislation or this issue, because it is not contained in the guideline. So that is an example of when we would go to council. So the advocacy process manual coupled with these guidelines are what guide us, for lack of a better word. We go to council very rarely. And by we, I mean CPAU. Council will usually hear something through the city manager's office on another issue. And that is because we have the advocacy process manual and we have these guidelines, and council feels comfortable that we are acting appropriately. Additionally, I should say that Palo Alto doesn't get ahead of other POUs. We don't act on our own very often. We are acting with our trade association CMUA. So we might be mentioned in a letter with 14, 17, 20 other publicly owned utilities. The times where Palo Alto has specifically acted on a bill, for example, supporting a bill regarding bonds, we will write a letter in support. and our advocacy process manual says that goes to the CMO for review. If he wanted to, he would put it up to council. But that is, that's rare. We have that process that we follow that I'm just not detailing here for you, but I certainly could if you want. I don't know if that gets to what you're speaking to.
I will just say, I think these should be values. I don't find them to be guidelines.
Sure.
So, but that's okay. I mean, that's just.
And happy to modify them to whatever level of comfort you all have.
I don't know. Do any other commissioners have any? Yeah, Commissioner Mill.
Hi, I'd just like to make a sort of semantic suggestion. In every one of the 9 guidelines, the word "we" is used. In 8 of them, "we" references CPAU as I read it. Except for number 6, which starts out as a municipal government, I'd like to suggest that one be written from the perspective of Palo Alto Utilities.
Sure, thank you.
Any other commissioner comment? Commissioner Forso?
Yeah, I guess as Chair Siegel was starting to say, it's hard to, I'm not sure what to think, because we went with something that I felt like I understood, which was to, advocate or oppose or support to these statements of values. It was the whole problem that was being solved was that support was too constrictive because something came up where sort of like the thing that was spiritually similar would have been to oppose something that was in opposition to that. And like, is restating everything in terms of values the best way to remedy that? Or is it to just add another line, comma, and oppose the opposite point of view on some of these?
Yes, but to your point, what if we want to educate or have a seat at the table without taking a support position or an opposed position? And so the challenge that we're trying to remedy is to allow staff to feel comfortable working within these values such that we don't have to oppose or support, because those mean very specific things in legislative terms.
Got it. I guess the only other thought I have is, you said that like day to day, nothing would change if we switched from these guidelines to these value statements. And certainly with you and the current staff, I have a high level of confidence that that would remain true. I'm just thinking 10 years down the road, if it's all new people, would it be less clear how to behave when they were restated in this way? So, so I would just raise that as a concern. And then I have a few nits on some of the specific points. Guideline number 1 talks about clean, renewable, affordable energy, but our city value, I think, is carbon neutral. So that might be more aligned with our policies. Point 3 talks about safety and reliability, and we lost the word security, which was in the previous version. I honestly don't understand what point number 6 is trying to make. Which maybe, again, it's like.
Okay, that has to do with local control. So I can wordsmith that.
And yeah, I guess those are my 3 specific points, and I'm still not entirely sure about the restatement of values. And I wonder if it's really more, adding educate and adding what you need to add to the previous statement so that at least there are verbs that we understand what the activities are.
Sure. And what we also could do, commissioners, is continue on with the current guidelines, because those are still in place. And by current, I mean the 2022 guidelines, and these are the ones that have been approved. And because I'm comfortable operating within those, as you noted, I'm comfortable continuing to do this, if that would make it a little more palatable to the commission.
commissioners have any feedback or thoughts? I don't know, then did you want to have a different motion? Should we take this motion and see where it goes?
Chair, could I ask one question?
Please.
Ms. Dollar, is there ever a situation come up under any of these guidelines that where a legislative question came up and you looked at the guidelines and you did not know how the city would react to the proposal and you had to seek guidance?
I can recall a situation coming up, Commissioner, a few years ago where, and I don't remember the specifics, but it was, I received a call from a colleague in Public Works who wanted us to take a support position on, I believe it was a wastewater issue. And I didn't have an idea about whether we should. There were some nuances in the bill that were a little troubling. And so I did look to the guidelines. And in that respect, the guidelines helped because I was able to say, okay, I can see that because of number 5, for example, we can move forward on this. And so that provided me with a level of comfort knowing that council and this body had already stated that we did want to do something in that space. It's a little vague, I'm sorry, but it hasn't happened in the past few years. It's just happened, I think, once or twice since I've been here.
But I take it in that instance, your concern was resolved by looking at the guidelines. You didn't have to come back to city council or the city attorney or whatever.
That's correct.
Okay. So I am a little concerned about the vagueness of the kind of the statement of values, which I think are kind of like mom and apple pie. It's hard to argue with any.
Okay.
And I just wonder if they would give you the comfort that you got in the one instance where you could go to a guideline and actually say, well, yes, we've approved supporting this kind of a position.
Yep. And so maybe, Madam Chair, what I could suggest, and I really appreciate this feedback because this is something new and different that we're trying, is perhaps if you all are amenable, the motion could be that you recommend the City Council continue the 2022 guidelines into 2023.
Okay, we can consider that. I had one more comment from Commissioner Bowie.
Yes. I was also just trying to look through as these kind of increase in specificity towards these values, how it seems like it would be more flexible in the 2022 version to navigate internal conflicts. I can see, or at least think of circumstances in the 2023 value statements where there would be a much greater possibility for a proposed bill to create an internal conflict between the values. And then, I mean, in that circumstance, what would happen? Would that be one where you would bring it back to council to resolve the conflict? Or is that one where the values themselves would dictate the path forward?
It would be the latter. I can't think of a time where, if a bill were in conflict with our values would trump the bill, if that makes sense.
No, that was not what I was saying, is that I can think of circumstances where one value is in conflict with another.
Oh, okay. I think in that, I don't know that that's happened very often, Commissioner, but in those times I look at the totality of the bill and the operational impacts. And so if, for example, there was a bill with regard to sharing data for the benefit of our customers, and it would assist customers in learning more about, let's say, the sources of water or about demand reduction for energy. That sounds like a great bill that we would support. However, it would also mean sharing customer data without getting their individual consent. privacy is very important. That's one of the proposed value statements. And so in that case, we may not support a bill because that would mean sharing our customers' data, which is something that we aren't inclined to do. So we wouldn't necessarily oppose a bill in that hypothetical, but we wouldn't support it either. And that would be an instance where we might provide education and meet with an office just to tell them of our concerns without coming out with a support or an opposed position.
Okay, I think that makes sense. But I think it may have also taken us down a side path from the discussion about our new proposed motion and things. So I'll set aside my questions about internal conflicts on the 2023 values so that we can return to a new proposed motion.
So if you're okay with maintaining them, I'm happy to see if the commission is interested in a motion to continue with the 2022 guidelines. Certainly you have these values to help guide you. They don't go away.
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion to continue with the 2022 utilities legislative guidelines.
Also move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we'll take a vote starting at home. Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Vice Chair Johnston,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell,
I'll vote yes, but note that certainly going forward, it might make sense to add some things to the 22 guidelines for the next time there's an opportunity.
Yes.
Commissioner Bowie, Commissioner Metz.
Yes, also, I think the same idea as Commissioner Forcell. If there are, ideas that would for improvement, then you should come back.
And I vote yes as well. So you have guidelines to continue working with and an opportunity to come back and amend them. I guess I would also ask that if you do come back, it's super helpful to have red lines. I appreciate these were so different. It was sort of no value, but that can be helpful as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much for your feedback on this.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have any comments, reports, or from meetings or events? Vice Chair Johnston.
Yes, thank you. I had one question and one comment on the quarterly report that was included in our packet, which as always is very interesting and is very helpful. But my question was on the graph, I guess, or the chart that's on paragraph 1.4. It really on page, well, it's packet page 136, but it really talks about outages. And there are two comments. One is, I don't know what units these outages are. It says the system average interruption duration index, 81.69. I don't know what that means. And I don't know whether that's good or bad or whatever. It's just, to me, it's a number that doesn't have any context. And we also see here the figures for Q1 and what the comparable figures would be for, for Q4 of last year or Q1 of last year, if it's the kind of thing that really varies seasonally. But this information, which is really important, is not presented, at least in a way that I can make much use of it. So that's my comment number one. My comment number two is, while the font that this is printed in looks very nice, it's really hard to read. And
I second that.
And the draft report that we saw that was presented, when we looked at, get ready for this meeting, was in a nice font that was easy to read. So as nice as this looks, it's very hard to read.
Vice Chair Johnson, thank you for those comments. Yes, we will make sure that we look at the font as we move forward in these reports. So the one thing that's very difficult to find is these numbers that you see up here for SAIDI, SAFE, and CAFE. It's not something that other utilities want to put broadcast out on their websites. And so it's difficult to do comparisons. Like, I wish I could find the comparisons to PG&E or, to some of the like Santa Clara or some of the other NCPA members. And that's one of the areas that I'm working on, that we can do some sharing amongst ourselves, so that we can do some comparisons how we look. There are nationals numbers out there that we can compare ourselves to, but we will work on this chart a little bit better to look at, how we're
also
doing
be useful, Director Batchelor, I think it'd be useful to compare it to ourselves. How are we doing over time? Are we seeing increased outages, so the outage is longer, decreased outages, so the outage is shorter? I mean, obviously, we'd like to see a positive trend.
So the thought process was that I was asked a couple of meetings ago to start adding these into the quarter reports. It's easier to see, quarter, if we had quarter one and quarter two, we're talking about quarter three, we'd be able to take a look at that since this is the first quarter. I'm open to suggestions to look at adding the fourth quarter back in there, or actually, if you would like to look at quarter to quarter from year to year, so quarter of 23 or 22, to do a comparisons of that. I can get that information. I can show you since this is quarter number one, I can leave the graph in there for the whole entire year of last year. And then as we move into quarter two, you can look at how we're doing in this quarter two of this year compared to quarter last year. So I'm open to suggestions, whatever makes it easiest for the commission to be able to compare ourselves. So I like I said, I could do the whole year of last year, and then as we move forward, we can compare them. Or if you just want to see the quarter to quarter.
Well, I think I would guess that outages are to some extent seasonal. You probably get outages in the summertime due to wildfires, and in the wintertime due to storms. So, but whatever is going to be a valid comparison that would give us a feeling of whether we're doing better over time or not as well over time on these measures.
Okay, let me think a little bit about that, because we do see we do also see, depending on how the weather is in the summertime, if we're going into a hot spell, we might find a few more outages where our equipment is stressed a little bit during that period of time. But let me think a little bit more about how we can change this so it's a little bit more, first of all, easier to read, and second of all, how we can do the comparison portions of ourselves.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments or reports? Okay, I just wanted to remind everyone that the UAC is currently recruiting. So if you're interested in being a commissioner, you may apply on the city clerk website. Okay. Does any commissioner have any future topics for upcoming meetings? Yes, Commissioner Metz.
Yeah, starting with the quarterly report, on page 124, it was pretty concerning statistics about vacancies and staffing. So I think it would be very important if we could have a discussion as soon as possible on what the plan is for addressing that. I know we touched on that in December, but I think it's really important that we get to that. And then there were some other topics that were on the calendar or recently dropped from the calendar, or schedule, that don't have a date, that I would like to see us address as soon as possible, which include grid modernization, which was on the calendar for December, not there now. Resiliency update, strategic plan update. We have a financial plan calendared for March, but not a strategic plan. And DER discussion for local resources was also is on the calendar to be scheduled. So I'd like to see those with firm dates.
Commissioner Metz, if my memory serves me right, I thought we gave an update on the grid modernization back in December or November period of time, along with the DER report that Lena Perkins gave during that period of time. I'd have to look at the month for you, though.
Yeah, there was a very high level discussion about grid, but it really, we need a much more in-depth discussion of that.
So
the outcome, what I recall hearing was something about union discussions underway and we can't talk about it. And then there was a discussion that we've got a consultant working on it, and when they get done, we can talk about it. So, it's obviously a hugely important topic, and I'd like to see us get to a firm date for talking about it.
Okay, I'll add that back on here. I'm just wondering if, is that going to be a quarterly report that we should add into, on the rolling calendar portion of it, or should we, because there's going to be some down months of, staff's working on it. But let me think about that, but I'll get that back on there for you.
If you're asking me, I personally see it as more an annual kind of thing that.
Oh, you want to go annual?
To have a serious detailed discussion about the plan and actions for grid modernization, because it involves so many complicated factors in both outside of Palo Alto and what we're doing.
It's because within this next period of time, by the June, July timeframe, we will have a plan. We'll have some consultants. We just had another phone call with another consultant yesterday about grid modernization, and Magellan, who is our fiber contractor, has merged with an electric contractor. Their company has merged together. And so we think there might be more synergies around maybe looking at fiber as well as the electric side, like when we were talking about maybe some pole replacements, or if we're going to do some electrical work where we're going to replace wire or transformers or something. And if we're going to be going through there at a later date with fiber, maybe there's some synergies that we can find some savings around that as well too, and share some of the costs. So
I think that's a good example. In other words, in the fiber plan, you can have opinions about pros and cons of the details, but we really got into the details and I think came away with, a pretty good plan for what to do about it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other topics? Yes.
It's already on the list. It's been there for a long time, underground process and progress. And I think, it's maybe top of mind because of the outages in the storm caused by trees falling on our overhead lines. And I guess I was going to ask, is it possible to simplify the topic to where it's much easier to have a discussion? Like, could it just be taking a look at how much undergrounding has happened in the last 5 years? Just the facts in the rearview mirror, and not have any expectations about what's the process or what should the process be, just to kind of so that the UAC can understand where we're currently at. Just wanted to throw that out there if that's a way to get the topic a little bit sooner.
Yes, we can do that.
Did you have another one? Okay, Commissioner Biggs?
Now I'm on the spot here. Yeah, so other business, I suppose. My wife was recently was offered a spot with Memorial Sloan Kettering's surgical oncology program as a fellowship. So when she rounds out her residency in June, we are departing to go to New York City. We've done what we can to look through to see if there was a way, but the bylaws require you to be a customer as well as our in-person rules. So unfortunately, I'm going to be resigning after next meeting as well. So I'm sorry to open another seat. I'm doing what I can to recruit other people for applications. I feel really disappointed. I've been honored to share the virtual dais as well as today, this physical one here. So thank you all. And thank you, to the city of Palo Alto and to the utilities. Thanks, everyone.
I was going to say thank you for your service. It is nice to see you here in person.
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much for the time that you've been able to spend. You bring value to this commission, and you'll definitely be missed. But thank you very much for taking the time over these last couple of years, and you definitely will be missed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
But we'll say goodbye next meeting. We're not going to say goodbye yet.
That's all right. I didn't know what I was quite being called on, but yeah.
Okay, and with that, I think we are ready to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
I second.
And those online can wave. Thank you, everyone.